The story begins in Paris, where a man with a tense face has been living in an empty building for 2 days, while constantly staring at the next building. The man turns out to be a professional killer who is waiting for his target to come out. But until now, he didn't know when and at what time his target would appear. While waiting, the man dubbed as the killer occasionally practiced yoga and went out of the building to look for food. He was then contacted by the person who gave him the job named Hodges, the lawyer. Hodges gave some important information that the target might come in 2 days or maybe 2 years. After breakfast, he returned to the empty building and did his usual activities while reminding himself that if he wanted his plan to succeed, then he must not have empathy. In addition, the killer also set a secret record in killing, where thousands of people he had killed. Not a single case was revealed. In the afternoon, when the killer was practicing aiming, suddenly there was a man who wanted to enter the room. Suddenly, it made the killer panic happily and prepare to shoot the man. But who would have thought? It turned out that the man did not enter and only threw away the platoon that he had made since 2020. After the afternoon passed, the killer released his negative aura by taking a short nap. But as an avid killer, the killer could not sleep like a normal person and had to wake up every 5 minutes so as not to miss his target moving. After enough time, the killer finally saw signs of his target coming, as the servants of the building opposite began to prepare the room for their master. Without thinking, the killer began to prepare his rifle and did not forget to wear black gloves. The killer then spotted his target, who was an old man. Although he looked just like any other old man, this old man had a lot of money and business everywhere. Hence, the old man came here for an important purpose, which was to hire a woman for his pleasure. When the pulse started to calm down and he was ready to shoot, he suddenly had a slip of the finger. As a result, his shot missed and hit the woman. Seeing the old man's bodyguards emerge, the killer immediately packed up to leave the empty building. He escaped on a motorcycle while throwing some evidence into a ditch and garbage truck. The killer then went to the airport to return to his hiding place, but he had to delay buying a ticket because many security officers were already on guard. After buying a ticket under a false identity, the killer told Hodges that his shot had missed. Hodges was shocked and angry because this was the first time that the killer had missed. Hodges then asked the killer to fix this. If not, then the killer would automatically receive the consequences. While flying, the killer was unsettled by a mysterious man who kept staring at him. Upon arrival at the transit airport, he again encountered the mysterious man who kept following him and waiting in the waiting room. To confirm whether the man was a spy, the killer was forced to stay overnight at the airport. In addition, the killer also had to keep watch in the room in case the man entered suddenly. The next day, the killer took a second flight and fortunately did not find the mysterious man again. Long story short, he then arrived at the Dominican Republic airport. It was in this country that the killer went into hiding place. He drove his favorite car to his home and met his beloved wife, who was located far away from the city. Upon arriving at the gate to the house, the killer saw footprints and cigarette butts scattered around. Realizing something was wrong, the killer ran to his house through the bushes. Upon arrival, he found that the living room was a mess and there were bloodstains everywhere. But the killer did not find his wife. With a feeling of apprehension, the killer went straight to the hospital and finally found his wife being treated for wounds. The killer then met his brother-in-law, who told him that there were 2 people, a man and a woman, who came to the house in a green taxi car. After that, they immediately beat his wife. With a look full of anger, the killer then told his brother-in-law that something like this would never happen again. Long story short, after his wife regained consciousness and started wake up, Magdala told the killer that she had not revealed anything about her husband to them, despite being beaten. Not accepting that his wife had been victimized, the killer returned home to retrieve his weapons. In the morning, the killer started hunting for the culprit by first looking for the taxi driver. Since there were so many green taxi drivers, the killer visited the green taxi rental. There he threatened the owner and started looking for the history of the taxi drivers. And that's where the killer finally found the driver who drove the perpetrator, named Leo Rodriguez. The next day, the killer found Leo, who had just left for work. Long story short, The killer then pretended to be a passenger. After passing through several alleys, the killer pointed his gun and asked about the two tourists who were drove by Leo. Leo then explained in detail, from picking up the two people and driving them to a house in the middle of the forest. Leo also gave their characteristics, one man with a large body and one woman with a thin body. Although Leo was theoretically innocent, the killer killed him anyway. This is in keeping with the killer's patent nature of not using empathy in his work. The killer then took a flight to New Orleans to meet his superiors. Upon arrival in New Orleans, the killer rented a van that he would use as a disguise. That's because it turns out that getting into Hodges' office is not as easy as getting into another's common office. Before that, the killer visited one of his storage units in a warehouse. There, the killer has a lot of identities and various license plates. After taking what he needed, the killer went shopping for tools, as he would be the gas stove serviceman to get into Hodges' office. Long story short, after everything was ready, the killer entered Hodges' office by sneaking behind a courier. After the courier left, he immediately took hostage Hodges' secretary, Dolores, then asked her to bring him to Hodges' presence. After the meeting, the killer tied Hodges' hands together on a chair, while Dolores was tied up in the bathroom. The killer then began asking Hodges about the two people who had attacked his wife, but Hodges refused and warned the killer that his wife's fate was caused by the killer's own actions. Instead of fixing the problem, he went home to meet his wife. Although the consequences were not too severe, the killer did not accept it. He then destroyed their mission log and shot Hodges in the chest with 3 nails. The killer then gave Hodges the opportunity to give the identity of the two culprits or their messengers, but before he could answer, Hodges died first. When it was Dolores' turn, Dolores told the killer that she would give the identity of the culprit, but on one condition, which is to make her death look natural, so that her children can get her death insurance fund. After agreeing, the killer went to Dolores' house with Hodges' body. There, the killer was given his wife's 2 assault identities. In addition, Dolores also provides the identity of the client who previously gave the mission to kill the old man at the beginning of the movie. After getting the identity, the killer killed Dolores by twisting her head on a ladder. This made it appear as if Dolores' death was caused by falling down the stairs. The killer then returned to his storage unit to cut up Hodges' body parts. After that, he boarded a ferry boat and dumped part of Hodges' body in the sea, while the rest he buried so that the puzzle of Hodges' body part disappearance would not be solved. The next day, the killer traveled to Florida to meet one of his wife's attackers, a burly man known as the Brute. The killer found the burly man's house with a pit bull. Realizing the pit bull was going to make a mess, the killer bought medicine and ground beef in advance to put the dog away. Once everything was ready, the killer discovered that the burly man was going to a club with his friends. He followed the man constantly until he finally went home. When the burly man was alone, the killer went into action by giving the pit bull some medicated ground beef, after which he entered the house through the back door. But while sneaking around, the burly man suddenly ambushed the killer, and a fight between the two ensued. Despite the large size of the enemy, the killer finally managed to kill it with 3 shots. However, the sound of the shots woke up the pit bull. The killer ran as fast as he could and finally managed to escape from the dog's bite. The next day, the killer took a flight to New York to kill one of his wife's attackers, a frail woman known as the Expert. Upon arriving at the woman's place, the killer discovered that Leo's words were true, that the woman was really thin. After waiting for a few hours, the killer finally saw that she wanted to leave for the city. He followed where she was going and ended up at a restaurant. There, the killer openly met the woman face to face. Knowing she was going to be killed, the skinny woman deliberately ordered her favorite food and asked the killer to enjoy it together. But the killer refused for fear of the food being poisoned. Here, the Expert tells the story of herself, just like the killer. She tells a story about a deer hunter who accidentally met a bear. The hunter shot the bear, but the bear was fine, and warned him not to shoot it again if he didn't want to get hurt. However, the next day, the hunter shot the bear again with a bigger gun, and so on. From that story, the killer was able to deduce that white bread smeared with peanut butter would make your stomach full. Without wasting any time, the killer took the expert to the park. In this park, the killer killed the expert. The next day, the killer travels to Paris again to kill the client who hired him to kill the old man at the beginning of the movie. The killer suspects that it was this client who asked Hodges to punish the killer itself. The killer then follows the client to his apartment. However, upon entering, the killer discovers that the door requires a special key. Being an industrious savage, the killer didn't just run out of ideas. He ordered a fake key panel from an online store to make a duplicate of the key. While waiting for the package to arrive, the killer pretended to sign up for a gym membership at the apartment. After that, he went to a criminal alley to buy a gun from an illegal gun dealer. In the morning, the killer gets the package he ordered yesterday. He starts the action by stealing an officer's locker key. After that, he took the officer's identity card and copied it onto the apartment's entrance key panel. Once everything was ready, the killer began to sneaking the apartment very smoothly. He finally meets the client, who turns out to be a wealthy trader named Claiborne. The client was confused at first because he didn't know the killer. But after the killer showed him the assassin's service card, he immediately realized that the armed man in front of him was the assassin he had hired. With a scared face, the client explained honestly that after the killer missed, he was called by Hodges. He informed him that the assassination was a complete failure. And to clear all this up, there was an additional $150,000. Since it was his first time booking a hitman service, and he had no idea what the world was like, the client complied with Hodges' request. The killer then provoked the client into talking about his wife's assault, but for some reason the client didn't seem to know what was happening to the killer's wife. Seeing the honest look on the client's face, the killer let him live. After realizing that it was Hodges who had ordered the two perpetrators to attack his wife, the killer finally decided to return to his house. Long story short, there the killer chooses a long vacation with his wife, who has begun to recover. And with that scene, the movie ended.